Hello, welcome back to another fantasy world building video. Today I'm talking about rulers. My name's Stephen, I'm a traditionally published fantasy author, and this is one of many fantasy world building videos on the channel, so go and check them out. So rulers, if you look at UK, where I live, England specifically, and go into other countries in Europe, then we have a long history of kings and queens going back centuries. This is fairly common, this is very popular, and a lot of people do that within their fantasy world. There's nothing wrong with that, you can absolutely do that, but there are lots of other things you could try and could look at, and I'm going to explore some of those today. What if, instead of having kind rulers, kings and queens, you had something a lot worse within your fantasy world, or just in one particular country? What if there's a dictator? What if there's someone whose control is so tight they rule with an iron fist? I'm not comparing it to anything in our particular world, but I'm sure you can come up with a few examples where people are afraid of the government, where the government can do absolutely whatever they want. They have absolute power, they control all communication, they control trade, they control business, they control the money, and you could have something like this within your fantasy world. Then that sets up some interesting dynamics. How do the other nations, republics, kingdoms around them get on? How do they communicate? How do they trade? Are they completely xenophobic? Are they cut off? What does that mean to the rest of the world? How do they treat them? And all these things have knock-on effects. If you think about ancient Greece, then you go back to all of the great philosophers and you think about all the things that Greeks came up with. Ancient Greeks, of course, had democracy. There were great thinkers and strategists and philosophers, as I mentioned, which some of them are still talked about and named today, thousands of years on. You think about the Romans and how big that empire became as it conquered and moved throughout the world. And if you were obviously a local coming up against them, you didn't want to be overtaken by the Romans and become part of their great republic, and didn't really have a choice in some cases, and many of them fought back. But then you get to that kind of thing of, are they better off after they've been taken over? And there's that scene within The Life of Brian by Monty Python. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there are a bunch of people sat around saying, oh, Romans, what have they ever done for us? And they start listing all these things off. Well, clean water, well, the aqueducts and roads and great trade. Yeah. But apart from all of those things, oh, well, there's less crime. Yeah. But apart from all of that, so you can start playing around something like that to say, are the people better off? Are they happier? Are they more prosperous? Have they been conquered and it's actually been a good thing? Most often when you have conflict within fantasy and other places and someone's been taken over, they don't want to be, and they're rebels and they fight back. Great stories, I love that, they're all great, I've done it myself sometimes, but try and find something new, try and do a little bit of a different twist. And if you did have one great society that was gradually spreading out throughout your world, how do they react to those who aren't as advanced? Do they just absorb them and uplift them into the society, introducing new technology to these people? If you go into our world, there are a couple of remote tribes still in the Amazon that have some contact with the outside world. Unfortunately, they can't be completely cut off. But if you go back maybe 100 years, 150 years, they had no contact with the white man. And when they came in contact with us, they got very sick because we had a lot of diseases and things that they weren't used to. They were quite a closed community, relatively speaking, and so they got sick with many of the things that we brought to them. What about in your fantasy world? Do you have something different? Do they just create a barrier around this place and say no one can go in there? Or do they go in and teach them language? Do they bring religion to them like conquerors and say you now have to pray to our God? Has happened in our world many times. These are all just different dynamics you can bring to the rulers within your fantasy world. Obviously some kings and rulers will expand their empires because they want the resources, they want the land, and they want to rule over a larger domain. And you can go back through history and there are a lot of great empires that have done this and tried to conquer the entire world, and all of them have eventually failed. Obviously, the larger an empire becomes, depending on however it's ruled, you still run into the same problems. There are civil wars, there are different people vying for control. Some are ruling because they've taken power, and others might rule due to bloodline or magic, or they've been chosen in some other means. But every ruler will come into conflict with people within their own society, whether it's family, people who want their place and they think they can do a better job, and this creates a lot of infighting. And many of the great empires throughout our history have collapsed because they just got too big, there's too much infighting, and they broke apart. An obvious example within a fantasy genre of different kings and queens fighting is of course A Song of Fire and Ice by George R.R. Martin, most commonly called Game of Thrones. Doesn't get any more literal than that. Different kings and queens within the 7 kingdoms fighting each other. One comes along and say, well, you killed my ancestors, I should be ruling. We had great dragons on my side and different families fighting each other. Then you've got other monstrous forces coming in. You've got people from overseas. You've got tiny island nations who think they should be in charge because they rule the seas. So there's all these great elements that he brings to this world that creates something that's very detailed and very layered. Another reason for particular rulership ties into one that I've done before on population. If you have a nation where 90% of the people born are women, then obviously the rulers and those in charge are going to be women. That's just how their society's built, a matriarchy. But what if you have the opposite and you have different tiers of society? What if you have a kingdom with one or more race living within it? And I've spoken about this before as well. You could have a kind of slave serf kind of level race of people and those who rule, those who think they should be in charge. You go back to the time machine and you'll know what I'm talking about. There's 2 different tiers of society. Another reason for someone to be in charge could be to do with superstition, and these go back to hundreds and thousands of years in some cases. And you think, oh well, we never have any weird things like that in our world, and yet we still do. We have ravens at the Tower of London to do with a superstition that goes back to I think the 1850s or thereabouts, where somebody said if there were no ravens at the tower, then the monarchy would fall. And so we've always had ravens at the tower ever since. I've been to the Tower of London. It's a great place to look around as a tourist if you've never been. Go and see the Raven Master, go and see all of his ravens, the fantastic birds. But then you think about all of this is just built upon a superstition that somebody came up with. And it sounds ridiculous, and yet we're still doing it over 100 years later. So what if there was a superstition within your world that no man can sit upon the throne, and therefore everybody who rules has to be a woman? How does society respond to that? Are they okay with it? And then you have different women fighting for control of the kingdoms and rulership, whatever it might be. Just another different spin and different twist you could put on it. Another kind of ruler could be an anonymous one. There's a thing that goes back to old Dungeons and Dragons and a place called Waterdeep, where they have the 12 Lords of Waterdeep. And these are individuals who wear masks and big heavy robes, so you can't know who they are. I can't remember how they're elected or how they're kind of picked. Maybe it's out of a hat at random or something. But these 12 people meet. They make all of the decisions in secret. Nobody knows who they are, but they know that they're the ones that rule. And therefore, when they're not at these meetings, they take their masks off and they live their lives completely as normal. They can't be attacked, they can't be replaced because nobody knows who they are. So you can't go after anybody. So that's a different twist you could put on perhaps the rulership. So the ruler could be based upon blood, religion, prophecy, superstition, could be to do with the genetic build-up of the races, it could be to do with how the society is built, could be to do with resources. There's any number of different options you can have. And of course you can mix and match. It doesn't have to be all one or all of the other. You could have a kingdom and a republic and something that's just completely anarchic where there's no particular ruler who looks after everything. Every town has their own kind of baron in charge or their own governor. So there's lots of great little details that you can do from looking at a map, working on the rulers, working on the structure, working on the layout. I always have fun world building, but as I always say, don't forget world building is not writing, so you don't want to spend too long months and months on it without doing actually any writing. So plan who's going to be in charge, plan who's going to rule the countries or kingdoms or sections of your world, come up with some different and interesting ideas and go forward with that and start writing the book. Don't forget to check out the Headspace writing community, there's a link down below, and there are lots of other world building videos on this channel, so check out them as well, but I'll be back soon with another video.